All right, Nicole, I think we're ready to go. So I will
Yeah, thank
forward
you.
them over. You want me to lead the prayers?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay.
Thanks, since you got the buttons.
Yep. It's just one page. All right. We're going to open with our four immeasurables. And so we'll say this 3 times to ourselves. May all beings attain happiness and its causes. May all beings be free from suffering and its causes. May all beings never be separated from joy that is free of misery. May all beings abide in equanimity, free from bias of attachment and aversion. May all beings attain happiness and its causes. May all beings be free from suffering and its causes. May all beings never be separated from joy that is free of misery. May all beings abide in
May all
equanimity,
beings abide in equanimity, free from
attachment
attachment.
and aversion. I think we had somebody on mute. May all beings attain happiness and its causes. May all beings be free from suffering and its causes. May all beings never be separated from joy that is free of misery. May all beings abide in equanimity, free from bias of attachment and aversion. All right. And so again, welcome everybody. Sorry I missed you all last week while I was in Omaha working away. But we have Nicole today as our facilitator. So I'm going to turn it over to her and I'm going to spotlight her. Well, I'm just going to, sorry, Nicole, give me 1 second.
Nope.
There you go, Nicole, and we'll let you take it away.
Thank you. It's good to see everybody. Hope everyone's having a good week. I just want to do a check-in with everybody. We're kind of at the halfway point here. So before we get started on the evening, I just wanted to make sure that your week's going well. I know we're getting into sort of moving beyond just the understanding of compassion and really taking it out into the world that we inhabit on a daily basis. And I hope you had a chance, if you did, to listen to the Dharma talk on Sunday or were there. And I cursed my Roomba left and right, but also find great joy with my Roomba. But this chapter of getting unstuck, I know for me really resonated because I get stuck quite a bit, just like my Roomba does. And so I in some ways I felt very experienced in talking about this chapter and reading this chapter. And then at other points, it's like, I don't know if I want to talk about this too much. But the good news is I'm going to ask you guys a couple of questions, which are going to kind of force you to maybe talk about some of your gunk as well. But I think what we'll do is I would like to start with just jumping into the first part of the chapter. Well, it's about midway. It's on page 127. And I'm going to just read, and this is actually past the meditations that were our assignment for this week. And talking about, Jinpa talks about the benefits from doing this love and kindness and compassion practice that has kind of been our homework for this week. And it's the second to the last paragraph there on 127, and it's a little long, but it's okay. He says, one of my favorite benefits from loving kindness and compassion practice is that it helps counter jealousy and resentment. Few of us will admit, even to ourselves, that we are jealous. But in today's competitive culture, jealousy is quite pervasive. It even creeps into our homes, as when spouses feel jealous of each other's success. Loving kindness and compassion practice, since it's basically wishing other people well, conditions us to take joy in their good fortune. This is the most powerful antidote to the problem of jealousy and resentment. Left unaddressed, jealousy can turn into resentment, and resentment closes our heart. So it's important not to let our feelings of resentment go unchecked. The first step is to recognize it, name it, and then examine where it's coming from. If we need to have a candid conversation with the person triggering our jealousy, we should do so for the sake of both parties. The real victim of jealousy, though, is ourselves. The instant jealousy arises, we lose our equilibrium and feel uneasy. Somehow, something isn't quite right. There's a restless energy about it, and we wish it would go away. But trying to deny our feelings of jealousy is like trying not to think about an elephant. We can't help but think about it. Dwelling on it, we may become bitter and spread bitterness like toxic fumes. We might speak badly about another person. We might even take pleasure in the person's misfortune. This is the opposite of loving kindness and compassion. Loving kindness and compassion is the cure. A much loved verse from my own Tibetan tradition, from the well-known text by the first Panchen Lama, has the following lines. As for suffering, I do not wish even the slightest. As for happiness, I am never satisfied. In this, there is no difference between others and me. Bless me so that I may take joy in others' happiness. And so I was taught that, and I'm aging myself here for some of you younger folks, but there used to be a time in which you had a credit card and you'd pass it off to the merchant and they'd put it in this little well and you take out this carbon copy paper and they'd put that down and they go, and they have 3 copies of your credit card. Some of you are smiling, you remember those days. Well, and then they'd pop that little carbon off and they'd give you the receipt and they would keep the hard copy. And I always have thought about resentment and jealousy as me holding on to the hard copy and giving them the carbon copy. No matter what I do, I was always the one that held on to the resentment in its original form. I've also heard oh, there goes Kitty. Hi. I've also heard the analogy of resentment as being drinking the poison, expecting the other person to die. And I get that one too. That makes a lot of sense to me. Doesn't mean that I don't do it because I'm human. And there are days in which, like I talked about in my talk, where I'm petty in my resentments towards the Roomba. And there are other times when it's full on deep level resentment against somebody. I've been kind of dealing with that a bit in my work right now. So I'm gonna just kind of let's start with some groups and I'm gonna give you guys a prompt about where do we stick? What gets us stuck? And so the question that I wrote down is, what is that emotion that gets you stuck? You know, Jim Pa talks about resentment and jealousy as being one of them. Could it be envy? Could it be pride? What sort of things clings our ego and builds our ego even stronger? And then he gives us the example that we're practicing this week of loving kindness and compassion as a meditation. But I'm curious to find out from you, what are the things that get you unstuck? So what's the thing that gets your ego clinging together, sort of sucking it all together? And then how do you free yourself? And then we're going to watch a little video after that. So, Lama Mad, are you doing the rooms? You need me to do the
Yep.
rooms?
Nope. I got them all ready to go.
All right. So
How long we want to get?
Oh, I think 10 minutes is good. We don't
10
want to spend too much in our stuckness, do we? No.
All right.
Thanks.
Should be getting a prompt. So once you see that, go ahead and join.
All right. I think we've got everybody back with us, and we got a couple of folks that joined us along the way. So welcome back, everyone. Let's just start in order. Group 1. What are those things that get you stuck, and then what practices do you use to get unstuck?
Derek, Louise, Beatrice, I think it was Mark, may have been the other one in there.
I vote for Derek or Mark.
I second the vote for Derek.
All right, Derek, you're up.
All right, and might I say, I really enjoy the way that this has evolved as far as who the spokesman for each group. I'm appreciating this dynamic and throughout these classes.
Sounds like you're getting stuck, Derek.
That's okay. That's okay. Yeah, all of us express different things that get us stuck. Some of it can be maybe resentment from less than ideal engagement with others. And our own personal feelings towards those things and the way that we evolve those. Others were mentioning just kind of expectations or frustrations when, there's something that's supposed to go a certain way and then it doesn't, and being able to manage with those kinds of things. We talked about expectations, and that kind of led us down that road to really, where I think it's expectations a lot of times that seem to be the universal line through everything, where things can get stuck for us, varying degrees of answers as far as the specific situations, though. Some of us are still trying to find the way to get unstuck. Some of us find comfort even in being stuck with just, taking the path towards finding a solution, maybe not being there yet. It's being okay not to have the answer, which is always a good reminder for myself. I know for me personally, engaging in my practice or reading about things like, reading this book through this challenge is definitely, there are times where when I pick it up to read it, it's exactly the moment I need to hear those words. And I'm personally grateful, Nicole, for you to highlight that passage right before we jumped into this. That was particularly pertinent for me. So that was kind of the main thing. Another solution to get unstuck was brought up was just being able to evaluate the situation to determine exactly where the information is coming from, whether or not that's valid information to have. Be able to determine whether or not your actions or words or emotional reactivity or whatever was the root of the issue or not. And then ultimately, and this was the part that struck me from this individual that I thought was the important part, was then being able to let it go. Mm-hmm. Being able to move on and let it go after being able to understand the situation. So lots of wisdom, and I was grateful for being in that breakout group.
Thanks, Darren. Yeah. You brought up some great stuff, and I think you brought up a lot of the stuff that was brought up in that second paragraph. This idea of the first step is to recognize it, name it, and then examine where it's coming from. I think one of the things I'm learning here as I start to get stuck is like, quit digging. If I'm in a hole, quit digging, and so like, just pause for a second, just stop. And that's not always been my response to everything. If I'm stuck in a situation, it's like those finger cuffs, I start yanking at it, but if I relax, that's when that changes. So anyway, good stuff. All right, group 2.
That would be Andrew, Daniel, and John.
I can go.
Thanks, Andrew.
So we talked about, let's see, some of us working in like a nonprofit capacity and trying to help people and having a deal of pride and kind of wanting to help everyone, and there always being more work to be done in that capacity. And way to get unstuck from that was like kind of having a thick skin and picking your battles, help the people you can, and turn down people when you have to. And then we moved on and talked about kind of anxiety, social anxiety, and avoidance behaviors, which has been a problem for me. Like I said, sometimes I want to skip the remake class or something because I don't feel like talking tonight. But so way to get unstuck from that was like practicing like doing the opposite of what I'm feeling at the time. And yeah, that's helpful in a lot of ways.
Yeah, that's great. Pride's a huge one for me, you know, that's where my ego just can take off. We're going to talk a little bit about humility here a little later on as kind of the antidote to this prideful stuff. So, good. Group number 3.
See, 3 was Lauren, Patty, and Ronald and Sheila.
Okay, I'm volunteering to do the talking tonight, and I want to say thank you to all the people who are volunteering to surmise their groups. Anyway, it was really interesting that we had I had a conflict at work, and then there were like another person that was likes to avoid conflicts, and then the other two were like had some anger that they were, and we were all like practicing the same, you know, practice to deal with, you know, whether it was anger or avoiding conflict or sticking up for myself in the conflict. It was ironic. I just got to tell you that yesterday at work, for me, it was this person that has been a problem for me in the past. I've worked with her for over 30 years. You know, she's like a sister, and we have butted heads a lot in the past. And when I started practicing Buddhism, I started doing metta for her, and it really helped. And I remember we were sitting around the table in the old Remay Center one time, and Lama Matt asked me, like, how long did you do it before it helped? I'm like, 2 years. But you know, but it comes back up, is what I'm getting at here, is that I'm not done doing metta. So anyway, that's enough out of me. Who's next?
Yeah. Was there somebody else in group 3 that wanted to share anything? Or did Patty do a good job? No? Okay. Yeah, I think this is a spiritual practice that lasts this lifetime and probably many more after this. So at least for me, anyway. Group 4.
Yeah, group 4 is Andrea, Fanny, and Jason and Julie.
So Fanny and Julie, I can do this unless one of you would like to. So
I'd like to. No, go ahead.
all right. Yeah, jump in, please, if I forget something. We had a lot of good conversation, things that kind of made us resentful. So it wasn't so much jealousy, I think, for our group, but it was more some different things. And I gave an example of my 23-year-old daughter. I've kind of struggled with her since she was probably about 11 or 12. And she missed, I feel like, some years of development, and still acts like a 12-year-old a lot of times. And I was a knucklehead at that age as well, you know, and still am probably. So, but one of the things I have felt very resentful over the years with just the amount of time and the effort and resources and stuff that I've given to her. And I have 3 other daughters, so I kind of, you know, try and balance all of that. But I had a lot of resentfulness towards her on different things. So it was hard to want to interact with her. So one of the things, I found this compassion training very, very useful. And especially this week, she was my focal point. So I think it was very helpful. But we talked a lot about some ways in dealing with that. So I know, I think Fanny talked about, you know, maybe pausing before reacting, or as you start to get resentful, and for whatever ways, maybe pausing, spending some time in nature, breath work, focusing on that type of thing. So all the stuff we've kind of talked about before. setting good boundaries, with these people, as you know that these are situations that are going to cause you pain or whatever. Those were some of the things we kind of talked about, mostly focused on ways we could sort of make ourselves better people when that happens. But anybody else in the group have something to add, or did I miss anything there?
That we actually rejoiced in other people's success, so that jealousy, as you spoke to, wasn't an issue, and that, pride for sure, inclusion, exclusion themes, things that got us stuck, and then everything mirroring. I talked about how sometimes what we react to in others is and this is psychology too, is often what we are dealing with, what we're reflecting. Our biggest triggers are what we need to learn when we see that, and how to stay connected, keep our hearts open, like that. So yes, it was a very stimulating group.
Awesome. So we have a couple of things in the chat for tonight. And Derek said, I tend to reach for a bigger shovel. Yeah, I get that. Like, I was trained to pull myself up by my bootstraps and get out of that hole. And then Andres says avoidance. I can second that. Yeah. I mean, I have to say there's points in which it's like, I don't want to lead this group, and it's like, we suit up, we show up, and we kind of just do it. I always think that it's like, I'm full of analogies tonight, I think, but I always think of myself as like the duck on the pond. Like, it seems like it's kind of going across gracefully, but underneath the water, it's just doing this over and over. Jason, I appreciate too this idea of having a perspective on the people around us, and I deal with college age students who are knuckleheads, and it's like, whenever I think they're being knuckleheads, I remember how I was when I was that age, and I was getting kicked out of colleges. I wasn't showing up to class. So I'm grateful for the hard work that they put in, and I'm glad I'm not a teenager today, that's for sure. So great shares, everyone, one and all. Now I'm gonna, I hope you had a chance to watch the video, the 2 videos that we put up. It's about 30 minutes, I think, total. Really, I think, really nice stuff from Thupten Jinpa. And I'm just gonna sort of start at the beginning of the second one and play about 10 minutes, because I think it's, for me, good to understand the soil that I was planted in. And the soil that I was planted in was one of, like, get a bigger shovel, Nicole, if you want to get out of this hole. And I think it's important to sort of see that perspective, or that worldview that we kind of, for the most part, have in this country in particular. And then I think Jinpa does a great job of kind of laying out an equation as to how we can take steps to break this pattern. So I'm gonna share my screen with you now. And Patty, I see you there. So I'm gonna ask you to tell me if you hear this. I'm hoping that you do. So.
And here, compassion really has to play a key part, because compassion is what connects us with others. And in a sense, even though in the West, because it's sort of a very individualistic society, and we are, because autonomy is such a highly prized value, and we are taught at a very young age to prize autonomy. And children, like, if you compare an Asian child upbringing with a Western child upbringing, you can see the Asian child upbringing The values brought are obedience, respect for the parents, and loyalty to your family, those kind of things. And you look at the Western style of drinking, and even between Europe and North America, there's a big difference. In North America, and particularly in the US, Canada is kind of included in there too. The more prized virtues are autonomy, being able to have a sense of control. So we push this quite early. So and so we kind of we grow up in this culture, and as a result, we prize autonomy and we prize a sense of self that is reflected back from this cultural value of an individuated self that has somehow core dimension of that is autonomy. There's nothing wrong with autonomy, but sometimes what happens is that in the process we then forget the deeply social and interconnected dimension of ourself. And this is one of the reasons why often in the West, unlike in the traditional societies, we see more and more people feeling kind of more alienated, lonely, because we have somehow lost touch with that more connected side of us. And this is why meditation practices like compassion or the 4 immeasurable prayers is a powerful way of reconnecting with that basic impulse that we all have. I mean, it's there's not, at the fundamental level, there is no difference at all between whether you're Asian or whether you're North American. But of course, cultural upbringing does make a difference. But because at the fundamental level, the instincts are and impulses are the same, in the West, maybe when you do, especially when you do Buddhist meditation, maybe certain types of practices which are not necessarily needed to be emphasized in the Asian context probably needs to be emphasized more in the Western context. And then there are certain types of practices which are probably not necessarily need to be emphasized in the Western context, probably needs to be emphasized in the Eastern context. So in mind training instructions, there is a beautiful kind of, marriage of this more focused self-awareness type cultivation on the one hand, with this more warm-hearted, connected kind of sense of cultivation of loving kindness on the other. And this way, what you get is through practice, and one of the beauties of mind training practice is that it doesn't require just formal sitting. And mindfulness, a mind training practice is something that actually is more efficient if you bring it in the real world. And of course, formal sitting is helpful because a formal sitting is when you have an ability to kind of bring something from the conscious intention and in some sense play it out like a kind of a rehearsal and then allow your natural sensibilities to arise. But it is in fact in the actual everyday world where you need to test it out. And so, for example, one of the teachings in mind training practice is, if you look at, and many of you have already taken classes on Buddhist psychology, so you know that, now increasingly in contemporary psychology, it's the same. There's a very intimate connection between the way we see the world, our perception, and the way we experience that world, which is our emotional world, and how we behave in the world. So that our emotions, our perception, and our behavior are dynamically connected. It's not a linear connection. The way we behave in the world influences how we experience it and how that emotional experience colors the way we perceive. Similarly, the way we see ourselves and the world, for example, if we see the world to be a very dangerous place, our immediate responses to the world would be that of fear and anxiety, and that will affect the way we behave. So we know from our own personal experience that our perception and our emotion and our behavior is so intertwined. So one of the teachings in mind training is to try to look at the chain, okay, and see where we can intervene. And so initially, when you're at the beginner's level, it's easier to, look back from a behavioral expression. So for example, imagine, say, you're home and your spouse come back from home, work and bangs the door, okay? So what you hear is this loud banging of the door, and you could say, you could just say, okay, he banged the door. Or you could immediately say, oh, he's always grumpy, So there's a phenomenon, there's an event, which is the loud noise, but then our mind immediately runs and interprets. And the interpretation, if you think, oh, he's always grumpy, he's angry, but he's always grumpy. He's always like this. And then you react negatively and you may say something. So the verbal expression is the actual action. Now, you know that if you tease it out, everything happens very fast, but in principle, you could see the chain. So there's a more chance to be able to catch yourself, before you shout. If you can bring awareness, self-awareness there, okay, you react negatively, you get annoyed, but you can stop yourself from shouting. So there's one chain, you can decouple that link. As you become better at it, so for example, if you're driving, someone cuts you, you could be shouting insults, or you could be swearing or whatever, but you can catch yourself right there. Now, if you can catch that, then you begin to realize that you could actually de-link the actual behavioral expression between the emotional reaction. Now, the next step would be to see if you can decouple emotional reactivity to the trigger itself. That's tougher, okay? That's tougher. Now, even there, if you think, there is still an interval stage where there's a trigger and you begin to get annoyed. So before you have a full-blown emotional expression, you have the beginning of an annoyance. And if you can stop there, that makes a difference. And eventually, if you can stop at the trigger level, so you can see that in principle, you can de-link these stages. The mind training instructions show us that we can do this. But this, you have to do it in real life, You cannot imagine happening this in a meditation. There's the famous story of, someone quietly meditating, and then a person walks by and says, what are you doing? I'm meditating. What are you meditating? So I'm meditating on patience. And then the other person says, in that case, go to hell, And this person, without missing a beat, says, you go to hell. so
All right. We have something in the chat here. Fanny. The choice point. Okay, good. All right. I'm going to stop sharing. Lama Matt, would you mind setting us up a couple more groups? Because this is what I want to talk about. This equation here, this idea of the intimate connection between our perception to our emotions to the behavior. Action happens, then we react. So then Fanny's bringing up that initial point, the choice. So let's, we're just going to go into our groups again, and let's see, 8:30, we could still do 10 minutes. Let's talk about this equation. Does this make sense? Does this work in your life? Is it working in your life? Tipton Jempa talks about like the cushion's cool, but really it doesn't work there. This is where the rubber hits the road, where we go out into our lives. And maybe we could talk about the successes of us decoupling, and maybe the less than successful moments when we don't decouple. All right, you ready?
So, yep, and I'm going to keep everybody kind of in their same rooms. I had to move a few people around, but you should be getting your prompt. And then if you can accept, Andrea, I think everybody is back. Yep.
Cool. Why don't we start this time with, we'll reverse the orders. Let's start with group 4 this time.
Okay, again, that's Andrea, Fanny, Jason, and Julie.
Yeah, and tell us your thoughts on the equation, this intimate connection between these three things.
I nominate Andrea. No.
She's
She's ruminating. She's ruminating. You know, I can always talk, so I want to give it over to someone else.
I'll do it.
I was just getting ready to throw you under the bus, Julie. Thought you had a good, some good
You
comments.
know what? I learned a lot here, so that's okay for me to get thrown under the bus for a change. So I think all of us agreed that there is truly a very intimate connection between our thoughts and our behavior and the importance of the gap in between, and recognizing the chain of both internal and external events that often lead to us to do particular behaviors. And I think we kind of acknowledge the times that we're able to give ourselves a little wahoo, you know, when we are able to be successful at being aware of the triggers and our thoughts about them, and then notice the gap in time to stop before we, you know, wave a particular finger at somebody and shout the appropriate words, you know, and that's a good thing. But then also one thing Fanny pointed out is the many times that we don't, that practice of, you know, that reflection time, or as it was called in this book, dedication time later, to get to notice what went wrong and to try to do differently or better next time, is really helpful. And as Jason mentioned, there's a lot more that goes into the shrinking of that gap than the immediate moment, because the events of our entire lives go into building these habits. And a lot of times we haven't been raised with the development of the skills that help us to recognize the chain, recognize the gap, and use it wisely. So.
Yeah, that's. Anybody else from that group? You know, I think that's, you know, I think that one of the things Jimpa brings up at the first part of this talk, this idea of autonomy that we're sort of conditioned to in Western culture, almost means that these kind of, this intimate connection that he's talking about is actually a detriment, that doing that work is a detriment, because you have to kind of move forward with your autonomous self, you know, this manifest destiny that's very much a part of an American ideal anyway. And so we're kind of counterculture to that whole idea that is part of the mythos of America. All right, group 3, which is?
That's Lauren, Maggie, Patty, and Ronald and Sheila.
Yeah. I could summarize it. Basically, everybody shared an experience of becoming basically what I think is just aware of a link in the chain, and then stopping there and not going on with a narrative, a story about what the trigger is. And each one of us had a different way of dealing with it. One person said that once they became aware of how they were reacting physically, that helped. Just notice the sensations associated with the emotion without the story, and try to do that as much as you can. Also, somebody mentioned just being aware that it was not what was said as much as that offended or was reacted to, but how they said it. And another person mentioned, again, just becoming aware of the emotion at the time, and then just the importance of being aware of that and just letting it flow out of you like water. And then I talked about, respond the way I reacted to things, something said, and then at some point telling a story to myself, and the importance of becoming aware that that little piece that I am reacting to is just a very small piece, and all the rest is in my head. The story that I told myself was what I was really reacting to, and that I really didn't know the whole story, and just know that you don't know, and just let it go. So that's basically, I think, covered. Did I
Yeah.
forget anybody, or forget anything? If anybody wants to fill it in.
Good.
Yeah, good. Thanks, Ron.
Okay.
You know, that physical reaction is really important. I have a great friend of mine who tells me, catch it at irritation, Nicole. And irritation, I understand, like I can recognize that. I can feel that sensation, a shortness of breath, a clenching of my jaw, knot in my stomach or throat. And he's like, catch it then. That's the point. And then it's like, okay, I love that. All right, group number 2.
Yeah, that's Andrew, Daniel, and Mark.
Hey, I'll go if that's all right. We got really specific and we talked mainly about driving. So we talked about how if you're driving and someone's driving really slowly in front of you, that can be really annoying and bring up a lot of feelings. And then, of course, the way to deal with that is to just teach yourself to have some perspective and realize, like, a slow person driving in front of me, I got nowhere to be that's that important. And also, it's not going to slow me down that much, right? Because we get so obsessive. So we really used that car example to really think about and relate to this. And additionally, we talked about, like, if someone cuts you off in traffic, what about then? Because then they're sort of putting you in danger. And that is the perspective of just reminding ourselves that we don't know someone else's story and we don't know what's happening in their life. And we have to remind ourselves of things like that when things are going bad. And I sort of added to that, we've been in a pandemic for 2 years. So we all know that everyone you encounter is more or less traumatized by that. And I think we can think about that sometimes when people are acting in ways we don't expect and making us upset and making us mad. We can remind ourselves, oh, we've all been in a trauma together, and some people have handled it really well, but other people have not. And that's a thing we can always try to remind ourselves.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think a lot of heads were nodding, some hearts at that moment. I think that this pandemic, at points, all of us have had just struggles with it, and finding compassion in that is essential for ourselves and one another. Group number 1.
So group 1, Derek, Leatrice, Louise, and Nora.
I vote for Leatrice.
Well, our discussion kind of got into this, the whole matter of when he was talking about the American character, or the American psyche, or whatever, and basically how this was just a story told us that we were brought up to believe in, that we built this great nation, but the reality being that it's kind of the result of 600 years of genocide and oppression, So where do you grab a hold of that link to try and turn the situation? And I think the point was made that the Buddhist teaching is that the oppressed and the oppressor are the same, are one and the same people. I don't know if that sounds right or not, but the oppressor has to realize that they're just as oppressed, and I don't know. I think I'll just shut up. I'm not doing any good on this. Maybe somebody else jump in on it.
Anyone else from group one have anything they want to contribute?
No, I thought that the Buddhist solution was that you have to do away with the dualistic idea that the oppressed and the oppressor are two different people. They're both people. It's like there's no enemies. We don't have any enemies. We're just both people. And so long as we think that we have an enemy, then we have this idea of dualism. And so when we meet people, we have to decide whether they're enemies or not. You see? But if there are no enemies, then we don't have to decide. And the reason why we think they're enemies and we have enemies is because of our own ego. I thought that was a Buddhist solution, that we have to get rid of this dualism, that there are good guys and bad guys. So when I meet up with anybody, I don't have to decide whether they're good guys or bad guys. That's what I thought the Buddhist solution was, anyway.
I mentioned this book on my Sunday Dharma talk, this big giant book on mind training. I love it. And I talked about one of the passages of the 7-point mind training is bring all the blame to one, and that one is ourself. Like it all comes back to us. And by practicing that, all of a sudden it's like got nothing to do with them. It's everything to do with me and my practice. So we have just a few minutes left, and I kind of want to finish with just another quick passage. And this is at the end of chapter 6, and I'll open it up to the group. We won't really have time for breakouts, but I like this idea, and it sort of, I think, leads us from the point of getting unstuck or decoupling these emotional, perceptional, behavioral links. And it's on page 131. And it's the second paragraph of the section. It comes back to connection again. As a teacher training retreat for our Stanford Compassion course, one of the participants asked, since our experience of suffering is so central to our capacity for compassion, isn't it a contradiction in wishing that others be free from suffering? This is a profound question. I answered that in wishing others freedom from suffering, we're connecting with their natural aspiration for happiness and wanting to be free of suffering. In reality, as human beings, we may never be totally free from suffering. And in this sense, it's an academic question. One might say that we'll deal with the problem of freedom from suffering if and when it happens. In any case, compassion is about how we all relate to suffering, our own and others. Suffering we have experienced, are experiencing, or might experience in the future, as much as it's about a fact of suffering. We could be free from actual suffering and still be afraid of what might happen again, if in which case we're not really free from suffering, so compassion would still be quite relevant. This is the extra dimension of suffering that we bring to our experience, which we could do without. This is why we care about it. The 8th century Buddhist scholar, author Shantideva identifies the important benefit of suffering. He states that our experience of suffering teaches us humility and makes us more empathetic toward others who are suffering. And to me, that's the stepping off point of that equation, right? It doesn't mean that we're not going to screw up. It doesn't mean that our perception's going to be off and we're going to react emotionally and our behavior is going to be incongruent with what our heart wants to tell us. But the key is that we gain a level of humility about it. Humility, this idea of like right sizing ourselves, of understanding ourselves. And if we have to, making some sort of amends or restitution for the harm of our behavior to those people, going to them and saying, you know what, like, I owe you an apology for what I did. To me, that's true. That's the humility part, blossoming from this whole thing. Understanding that we're really doing the best we can. So I just open it up for the last couple of minutes for any comments about anything in the chapter that stuck out to you guys. Any final thoughts you have about tonight, the video, this idea of gaining humility through this sort of decoupling process?
It's liberating to know that it's doable. You know, that we're here working with it, working with our own minds, reflecting, trying to do better, taking our time out. You know, I think that that's what we can reflect to others, that they're equipped as well. I think that's a very kind act to, even though we're not modeling, because you know, we're just students on the path together as we are professionally, you know, we all have our different ways of expressing ourselves. So that to me is a very sustainable in this human life condition, to always keep our heart open. He speaks to that so much. I mean, I watched Mission Joy like so many times, and that keeping our heart open, heart open, heart open, heart open, heart open. And, you know, of course, the heart, we're the ones that we're going to just keep our hearts open are going to be the ones that are most hurt. But then at the same time, Luis, like you were saying, you know, how do you transcend this dualistic notion of heart open, you know, means I'm going to be more subject to vulnerability and the harshness of the world and Ukraine. Please, let's pray for them. The constant nature of the daily, and I think, Jason, you said this, like, how do we abandon the fact that there's even a trigger? You know, because we were talking about our triggers. Like, imagine that if that's not even identified as a trigger, that's just a rise and fall of watching it rise and fall of phenomena. So I'm grateful for the you know, for us, for our study together.
Thanks, Fanny. I think that's a great way to close us out tonight. So, Lama Matt, you want to bring up our engendering Bodhicitta? Well, I'm assuming it's in.
Yeah, engendering Bodhicitta. One second, let me get that pulled up for everybody. We'll just do this one time. Bodhicitta is precious. May it arise for whom it has not arisen. Once arisen, may it not diminish, but ever grow and flourish.